Hey guys, it's time for part 3. I was gonna wait until after I got over this whole corona thing before I did this, but one of the worst things about this bug is it makes you real bored real fast when there's not a lot you can do. So I figured I might as well go ahead and give it a shot. Alright, let's do it. Part 3.
Hey guys, I'm totally in for taking out Bolin. He's way too powerful and awesome.
I think that even among people who despise The Legend of Korra, many of them tend to agree that the villains are super well written and super well made. However, I've seen a ton of people completely misinterpret what the villains are made to represent, and it's those misinterpretations that make people hate them and thereby the show. Because as I've said before, and I'll say it again, they hate it because they don't understand it. As you'll see with all of these villains, one thing that they all have in common is this. They all start off with good intentions, and what they stand for is a universally good thing, but the way they go about achieving those things is the wrong way to do it, thereby making them villains. Going in chronological order, let's start with Amon.
Okay, at this point I do kind of have to disagree a little bit. In my opinion, I don't dislike the villains because of their motivations, or their goals, or their personalities. That wasn't the reason I didn't like the villains. I had different reasons. So I will hear what you have to say about them and their motivations, and I'll address what you say. But I also want to point out what I thought was wrong with them, or what I felt could have been done better with them to make them better. I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong. There are probably plenty of people who took issue with their motives or personalities, and I agree. I think that that's silly to make that the big point of contention. There are lots of other things to come after these villains for. So, hey, I'm willing to hear. But I personally, that was never an issue for me. I never had any issue with the personality or motivations of these villains.
It's clear to anyone that Amon is supposed to represent the faults in the human concept of equality, and some go as far to say communism, though there are issues with comparing him to the latter. It's clear to anyone, though, that Amon stands for equality. He wants benders and non-benders to be equal, which is not a bad thing. The thing that makes him a villain is that he manufactured outrage to get non-benders to join his cult, committed literal acts of terrorism against Republic City, and did both of those things under a false identity that killed his entire movement once revealed. The problem with Amon is that you cannot achieve true equality by oppressing others. He made the non-benders think that they were being oppressed by the benders, and whether or not that was actually true, you wouldn't solve that problem by taking out the benders. You solve it by both sides compromising. This might get a little racy, especially given recent events, but I don't think I'm saying anything radical when I say this, but a good base level, and I repeat, base level comparison to Amon is the civil rights movement of the 1960s. African Americans wanted the same rights as white people, and they mostly went about doing so in peaceful ways. Of course, that's leaving out a ton of real conspiracies, riots, and other shit, but the point is, black people did not achieve civil rights by removing all the white people. They came to a compromise which was sorted out legally in the form of legislation. Amon is basically doing the opposite. Instead of taking his gripes to the Republic City Council or peacefully protesting with his supporters, he created a cult with the goal of removing benders from the equation entirely, and went about doing so through terrorism. Whether or not the non-benders were actually being oppressed by benders is irrelevant, because Amon made them think that they were, even if they weren't. That's what makes him a villain, and an interesting one at that, considering how manipulative he is. A lot of people also seem to have missed the point of Amon being revealed as a bloodbender. They feel as though it came out of nowhere and that it defeats the purpose of his crusade against benders. What those people see as a negative, however, I see as the point. Amon being revealed to be a bloodbender does make him a giant hypocrite, but those same people must have skipped the backstory episode, because that episode pretty clearly outlines why he's doing what he's doing. He saw the type of oppression that benders could inflict on non-benders by seeing his own abilities in action. He saw what bending could do to people in the wrong hands by discovering his father's identity as Yukon and by using bloodbending himself. This was what warped him into the person that he became, a negative change arc, if you will. He wanted people to be equal, but his view of equality was a world where benders could not do what he can do, and I think this pretty much brings us full circle.
Amon, okay, granted, I see your point, but Let me just say this about my issue with Amon. My issue with Amon was never his stance, his position, or his motivations. The idea that he was a hypocritical bad guy is okay. You know, I don't mind the fact that he's hypocritical, except for the fact that in my headcanon, what I initially thought Amon was when we didn't have his identity revealed, I thought it would have made so much more sense than him being a bloodbender. You want to know what I thought he was? It was when his brother tries to bloodbend him in the snow cabin, and he resists it. My first thought was, what if he's a cyborg? Oh, no, walk with me on this one because it still ties into the original lore. Sparky Sparky Boom Man had cybernetic arm and leg, and with this modern technology that Korra is boasting with a 1920s-esque feel where we have cars and blimps and factories, it would make sense that you might have this guy who's a non-bender, down on his luck, poor family, but he gets oppressed or mistreated by the Triple Thread Triad. He tries to stand up for his family for once. They beat him down, kill his family, burn off his limbs. He has to go to Mr. Sato to go through experimental treatment to get his limbs replaced with bionic ones, thus making him resistant to bloodbending, which would explain that. It would also explain why he has such heightened reflexes. Maybe he adds like an electric pulse to his hands, kind of like the electro gauntlets. And so that might explain how he could block bending. Maybe instead of mastering chi blocking, which he still could have, maybe when he does that cool move where he's taking away bending, he's actually releasing an electric charge through the chi pathways, which permanently shuts them off. It's a stretch, I acknowledge, but what it does is it builds on a previously understood idea, bionics, which we saw in Sparky Sparky Boom Man, and builds on it. It doesn't break any rules, it just builds a few. With him being a bloodbender, yes, I know, extend your suspension of disbelief. I remember you saying that, but why should I have to when there are other really good explanations that could have been used? On the one hand, I thought my idea made sense. I thought that it was creative. I thought that it made a really cool character. And then I just found out, oh, he's just Darth Vader.
The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
And sure, okay, I know he's not really Darth Vader. It's not the Force. But come on, when you can levitate people with your mind, because that's essentially what he's doing when he controls the wolves without moving his arms, when he holds up his hand to force choke somebody. I mean, there comes a moment where I have to go, he's Darth Vader.
Everything the Avatar said is true, isn't it? I just saw you bloodbend her. You traitor! I dedicated my life to you!
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Now, again, I have no issue with his motivation. He wants to make everyone equal. Fair enough. And in the backstory that we saw where he wants to make everyone equal because he sees how bending can oppress people, and yet he somehow uses his own bending to do just that. Again, hypocritical, but fair enough. Still, lots of villains in history have been hypocritical people. Very true. So I'm not shaming him for that. What I do take issue with Amon, like I said, my issue with Amon is they bent a rule that was previously established to make an intimidating villain, instead of just building on a previously established rule. And there is a difference. With bloodbending, we established that a waterbender could only bloodbend under the light of the full moon. Any waterbender could do it, but they had to be able to do it under the light of the full moon because the full moon granted extra power to waterbenders. Now we have a dude who, through mutation, that's the best we get, mutation, can bloodbend without the need of a full moon. When was bending ever susceptible to mutation? And yes, Sokka tries to point out, well, Toph discovered metal bending. No, Toph learned how to feel the earth within metal and learned how to manipulate the earth within metal. That wasn't a mutation. That was discovering a new branch of her talent. Bloodbending, you could argue, is a new branch of waterbending. Mutation, to be able to do it without the need of a full moon. A genetic Kekkei Genkai. Because that's what it's become now. It's become a Kekkei Genkai from Naruto, where you can just do something based on a bloodline. See, I'm willing to extend my suspension of disbelief to a certain point, but why should I have to when there could have been much better explanations further back? But that's just me. Again, that's my own personal issue with it. If you like it, okay. I'm sure there are people who can explain away the reasons why and give all these good explanations as to why he can do it. That's fine. I don't honestly care all that much. My point being, they didn't need to bend rules previously established when there were much better ways to make him intimidating.
Now let's get into Unalaq. I'm not going to go too in-depth with Unalaq here because many of the problems people have with him are fairly accurate, but that doesn't mean there aren't things to defend here. For me personally, I actually kind of like how Unalaq starts off with a very noble goal, assuming he was being truthful this whole time, of wanting to peacefully reunite humans and spirits, which slowly transitions into a thirst for power that sends him into madness and eventually becoming the Dark Avatar. Like we said earlier, noble goal, horrible execution of said goal. Similarly to Amon, Unalaq is very meticulous and manipulative, and you see it in every scene that he's in. He manipulates Korra into opening the spirit portals, he manipulates his brother and both water tribes into a civil war, he manipulates his own children into doing some pretty bad things, he holds Jinora captive to get Korra to do what he wants, he manipulated harmonic convergence itself to merge with Vaatu. You get the picture. He's a conniving villain with motivations that get progressively less noble as the season progresses, and I don't think that he gets enough credit for that.
I actually agree with everything here. Unalaq is easily the weakest villain here for me. I really was never a big fan of him. And honestly, yeah, okay, if he was truthful from the very beginning, then it is an interesting transition that he got from becoming a dude who wanted to unite the spirits and humans and then just became hungry for power. But let me tell you my one problem with that. It's just a mirror of the Fire Lords. Not Fire Lord Ozai specifically, but the family line. You know, with Sozin, what was his reason for starting the war? He wanted to unite all the peoples under the Fire Nation banner for a good cause. You know, he looked around and he said, wow, look at all the good things that the Fire Nation has got. Look at all the great benefits we have. Next up, let's bring the whole world under this so that they can all experience our great prosperity. And then down the line, the children of Sozin kind of lost sight of that until we get to Ozai, who's ready to finish the great-grandfather's legacy without really realizing why he's doing it or for what purpose, or mostly it's just for power. He just wants the power. And that's kind of what I see in Unalaq. Starts out with a noble goal of, I want to unify these people, and then becomes, I want to be Dark Avatar. The difference, though, for me is, there are a few questions that I have, and maybe they were explained and I just don't remember it, but how did he know about Vaatu? How did he know that harmonic convergence would help make him the Dark Avatar? How did he know that would work so well for him? I mean, when Juan and Rava merged, I almost felt like that was almost a fluke, almost like that was accidental, almost like that was a 1 in a million chance, you know? Or maybe it was because Rava and Juan had such a close connection, or they'd been working so long together that they just understood each other and merged in a very good way. What kind of connection did Vaatu and Unalaq have? But leaving that aside, that's speculatory. That's not a big deal for me. That's more of a nitpick. But the big issue I have, I think, is it's just boring. There's not a lot of meat in his motivation. It's more of just, it's just another power-hungry villain, you know? May have started off noble, but at the end of the day, just power-hungry villain. And then becomes the Dark Avatar. I never liked Unalaq. He was the weakest to me. There wasn't a lot of meat to his character or to his motivations. It was all just, meh. And I know what some people are probably thinking. Hey, didn't you say that you weren't going to come after these villains for their motivations? Yeah, you got me. Unalaq's the only one, okay? Unalaq's the only one, because there's just nothing good I want to say about Unalaq. The only good thing I can possibly say is, yeah, he was a decent manipulator, but lots of villains, good villains, are good manipulators, so I'm not going to give him that much credit for that. More than anything, it's just his motivations are just so weak.
Next is Zaheer, and honestly, I think he's the best villain because, acts of violence aside, he really wasn't a bad dude. Zaheer's goal was to achieve freedom for everybody, which, if you're noticing the pattern here, isn't a bad thing to strive for. It was the killing of political leaders, sending a nation into disarray and anarchy, and attempting to end the Avatar cycle that made him a villain. He went so far down his own freedom rabbit hole that he dove into anarchy, but not in the way that you'd typically think of an anarchist. His thirst for freedom and disdain for oppressive governments became so one-sided for him that he eventually came came to the conclusion that any government can become oppressive and therefore can restrict freedoms at any time. So he saw it best to get rid of all governments so that can't happen. Freedom for all is a noble goal, but bringing about anarchy is a terrible execution of that goal. The problem with that being, of course, that what he wanted was a world without order, and the opposite of order is chaos, not freedom. He makes this all pretty clear in Season 3, Episode 9, so I'm gonna assume anyone who didn't understand this must have missed that episode. I also recommend checking out Hello Future Me's video about Zaheer wanting to kill the Avatar. It's a very good video. Moral of Zaheer's story: freedom is a great thing and should be valued, but chaos is what happens when there is freedom without order.
Actually, I have to agree. Zaheer is probably one of the better villains in the Avatar Legend of Korra. I really liked him. I thought that he was a unique character. I thought that his style was simplistic but very effective. He was like what would happen if an airbender just abandoned their passivity, and yet there was a hint of passivity to him. He's like, what if there was an actual evil airbender? I always thought that that was really cool. The way he moved, that ability where he could suck out the air from someone's body, was actually really intimidating. I thought he was a very unique enemy. I liked him a lot for that. There were just a few things that made me scratch my head. Like, for example, how long did he have the skill of airbending? You know, a couple people were pointing out to me, hey man, there's a difference between being a bender and being a master bender. You're right, there is a difference. How long was he able to bend before he was flying without a glider? That's my question. This dude had bending for only a brief period of time, not even a lifetime, a brief period of time, and was able to do a technique that not even Aang's kin could do. Like when Aang was alive and all the airbenders were alive, this guy says there was one airbender capable of this technique. There was one airbender who, I think his phrasing was, never had to touch the ground again. Okay, where did you learn that? And why did you learn that unless you knew you were going to be airbending someday? He says he learned this by reading the poetry of some airbending guru or master from thousands of years ago. And in the poetry, he says that you can let go of your instincts and enter the void and become wind. And that's nice philosophy, but here's my ultimate argument against that. An airbending master like him would have airbending down to second nature. It's a part of him. It's a part of who he is. He's known it his entire life. Zaheer just figured out airbending. He's just recently mastered it. He's just recently got the hang of it. Even if I'm willing to give him that short amount of time to master this art that's been lost for over 100 years, he can now suddenly understand the philosophy of this airbender after only just reading his poetry, never watching him in action, never learning from him, never learning from an airbender. He just suddenly gets it. See, that's stuff that, again, I'm willing to stretch my suspension of disbelief until I just can't anymore. Like him gaining airbending. Okay, yep, we'll give you that one. The fact that this coot, this crazy guy who would definitely use power to do dangerous things. Yep, sometimes dangerous people get power. Grant you that. The fact that he could master airbending techniques very quickly, so well in fact that he's able to overpower experienced White Lotus benders and escape. Again, I'll grant you that one. I will give you that. I'll stretch my I'll stretch it that far. Can fly without the use of a glider. Okay, what? That's the point I have to kind of draw a line, because it's a rule that has not been established yet. If the rule had been established, then we might be somewhere. Now, some people might point out, now hold on, when Aang entered the Avatar state, he could fly. Yeah, but there was a cyclone of air around him too. Are we just not meant to see his? I don't know. I feel like this jumped the shark just a little bit. I feel like that's just a little too unbelievable. I want to accept it because it is cool. It's a really badass power that he has. But, and yes, y'all said of me in your first Twitch, I seem like the kind of person who demands explanations for everything. Not everything. I don't need an explanation for everything. I don't need it explained to me how he got to be an airbender or how he knows advanced airbending techniques. I'm willing to accept those things. It's where he can do an ability that has never been established before, and he said only one airbender from ancient times has ever been able to do. That is something I need explained to me. Some things need to be explained, some things don't need to be explained. That's something I kind of want explained. But other than that, I do like Zaheer. He is easily one of the best villains in this show, okay? I think that he's great. I liked him more than Ozai, I'll be honest. I liked him a lot more than Ozai. Just because he was far more interesting to follow. And Ozai wasn't that great a villain to begin with, if I'm being honest. His motivations were kind of murky too. But I like Zaheer. He's a good villain. That's just something that I always said, why? Why can he do this?
And lastly, we have Kuvira. With this power vacuum in the Earth Kingdom after the death of the Earth Queen, Kuvira set out to fill that vacuum and reunify her now fractured nation. The problem is that she did so by military force and intimidation, leading her to become a total dictator who got power hungry enough to start taking land that wasn't hers to take. Kuvira is a play on the term absolute power corrupts absolutely, and we can certainly see this throughout Season 4. She is so devout to reunifying her nation that she believed the only way to do so was by military force. She is the opposite of Zaheer, and that Zaheer wanted freedom from oppressive governments, Kuvira was the oppressive government. Kuvira illustrates the very issues that Zaheer warned them about in the previous season, and shows the many issues that arise from military dictatorships. She had a vision to reunify her nation, but once that was completed, that suddenly wasn't enough for her. She became corrupted by the power that she had obtained through her crusade and the Spirit Cannon, and all that power became the arrogance that led to the attack on Republic City and her eventual fall from grace.
Yes, Kuvira. Female earthbending Hitler.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Some people have actually said that's not what she is. No, that's exactly what she is. And no, don't get me wrong. I think that's cool. People may not realize this, but Hitler was a fascinating historical figure. I mean, let's think about what was going on with Hitler and compare him to Kuvira. You know, when Hitler took power, Germany was still reeling after World War I and were being forced to pay for the damages and pay for the cost of the war. They were in debt, they were being insulted, they were being mistreated. The Soviet Union was coming in telling them that they should be communist and that they'd be better for it, while the rest of the Western world was telling them that they should be ashamed of themselves for causing the war in the first place. They were broken and they were feeling ashamed of being German. Then along comes this guy named Hitler and his Nazi party, and he says, hey man, not only should we not be ashamed of ourselves, we should be proud of being Germans. Being German is awesome. You should be proud to be German. We are the best. We're the master race. Now, people, when they feel this downtrodden, start to ignore some of the bad parts about their saviors and say, well, you know what? You're right. We should be proud of ourselves. We should feel uplifted about ourselves. We're going to follow this guy. Who cares if he has some pretty fanatical ideas right now? I'm sure we'll iron those out. He's got the right idea. And so you start following these people who start making you feel good about yourself. And that's kind of what got Hitler into power in the first place. He reached out to a broken and scared people. Now let's look at Kuvira. You get done with this huge war with the Fire Nation, which leaves your country and economy crippled by the Fire Nation. You have a queen who's kind of a bitch, let's be honest. Then she dies, and now you have a power vacuum in the Earth Kingdom, which is still kind of reeling. Here she comes, ready to fix everything. And people are kind of glad to see this powerhouse who's ready to give Earthbender pride again. You know, like, let's be proud of being Earthbenders. Let's be proud of being an Earth Nation. But then she takes it a few steps too far. It's very similar, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a unique villain. That's a good villain. So what's my problem with her? There are two problems. The first being, and this is kind of a problem that I have overall with the whole metal bending thing. When Toph first discovers metal bending, she's not summoning up metal and launching it at people. She's bending it, literally morphing it into new shapes with her hands or body. Later in Legend of Korra, they show them shooting metal or metal darts and stuff like that. Now, okay, I'm willing to accept that because maybe Toph and her children and their descendants and all that started refining the art. So I'm willing to accept that. That's not as big a deal. That's more of a nitpick for me. The second problem? A Megazord with a spirit cannon. that's a problem for me. Like that's again kind of where I have to draw the line. That's kind of the moment where I watch and go, "Ke? Nani? What is this?" And don't get me wrong, okay? I have nothing. There are jumping the shark moments that I'm willing to laugh off or just brush off, but this one I'm kind of like, really? It was a bit too much for me. Okay, a spirit cannon, iffy, but I'll take it. That spirit cannon mounted to a giant megazord. Sorry, I kind of have to stop you right there. Now, some people might point out, well, what about the giant drill that the Fire Nation used against the Earth Kingdom? There's a difference between a giant drill and a bipedal megazord, a giant mecha tank. People love to say, Avatar isn't anime. I'm sorry, it isn't. Look at that. Isn't that drawing directly from anime? Oh, boy. So yeah, that was my biggest problem. That felt like such an over-the-top moment. Again, I don't hate Kuvira for her character or her motivations. In fact, they make a lot of sense to me. I actually can look at history, because I'm a history buff. I love history. I can actually look at history and say, wow, that makes sense. I see the connection there between her and people like Hitler. I see how you can make a good villain out of that character. It's the giant Megazord with a laser cannon. That's kind of where I had to go, no, that doesn't work for me. In fact, if I'm being honest, season 4, the biggest problems I ever had with season 4 were the entire time that Korra was in her post-traumatic stress phase, which I just wasn't a big fan of. And then the ending, where a lot of the side characters were just shafted and pushed to the side to make way for Korra and Asami's relationship. The things I liked about season 4 included Kuvira, her march on everything, and her blind determination to reunite the Earth Kingdom, even though it meant the destruction of so many other things, and Toph's return. Those were all pretty cool things about season 4. The giant two-legged tank with a giant spirit cannon. A funny thing, I want to point this out. Again, you say that I'm the kind of person who needs an explanation to everything. You know what I didn't ask for an explanation for? I didn't ask, where are the guns in Avatar Legend of Korra? We have a 1920s era world where we have cars, blimps, biplanes, radios, no firearms. You don't have those? Wouldn't those be a great tool for non-benders to develop if they really wanted to fight back against benders? Wouldn't firearms be a good thing? But I never questioned that. I never asked that question because I am willing to accept that this world will never have those. For this world to work, those will never be a thing. I'm willing to accept that. But when you bring in giant mecha tanks with giant spirit laser cannons, it is at that point I have to stop and go, yeah, could we get some RPGs up in this? Because at that point I have to wonder, where is the line that we cannot cross? If I can't extend my suspension too far, man, because at that point I have to ask, where is the line that shall not be crossed? At what point can we draw a line? That's my question with Kuvira.
I guess the point I've been trying to make here in regards to the villains is this. Just because you don't understand them or agree with their ideologies, that doesn't make them poor characters. It's not that they lack complexity, it's that you failed to see it, and a lot of the time, that's why people dislike these characters. They see that these characters stand for something and notice their hypocrisy, and try to spin that as a way to dislike the character, yet fail to realize that you're supposed to disagree with their methods, and you're supposed to notice their hypocrisy. Their ideologies are intentionally flawed.
It's about opposites. See, I want the bad guy to be different than me so I know why I hate him.
Combine that with oversimplifying them to the point of misrepresentation, and you've got a textbook case for how to completely misinterpret a character.
Good villains are tricky to write. They are. And you make good points. Quite often with villains, we're supposed to disagree with either their methods or their goals or their outlooks. We're supposed to. And I also want to point this out. One of the big problems I've seen with villains today in most forms of media is they always want to make us sympathize with them. They want to create the sympathetic villain who we look at and go, oh, I feel for them. I understand what they're going through. I want to cheer for the good guy, but I feel so bad for their position. Sometimes I like a villain who's just evil. Sometimes a villain who, even if they do have a sad backstory or a tough upbringing, I still kind of want to see them get beat. Characters like Zaheer and Kuvira are good villains to me because with Kuvira, I recognize the idea of wanting to restore honor to her country and reunify her country, but taking it to an illogical extreme. I understand people like Zaheer believing that freedom is an important thing to strive for, but being so blinded by the idea of freedom that they take it to, again, an illogical end. These aren't problems, which is why when I addressed my problems with them, I never brought up their motivations. The only one I brought up motivational issues with was Unalaq, because with Unalaq, his motivation was honestly just weak to me. I was never a big fan of Unalaq because of that. I think that one of the things I will say good about Korra is that it's something that a lot of people have pointed out. Korra provided unique villains for each season, and that can be a good thing. That actually was a decent idea rather than the Fire Lord being the same villain all the way through in the first series. So I will give credit for that. I think the problem that I had, though, was that with the Fire Lord was built up all the way to his final reveal. There was a fear to him, this kind of scare. He was always in the shadows with a booming voice, which made you very frightened. When he finally does show up, yeah, he's a little underwhelming. He doesn't seem all that scary, and he does get beaten pretty soundly in the end, So I'm not going to say that his big reveal was great, but he was still an intimidating presence. We had a whole episode just of Aang going through terror of the idea of facing him. So I give full credit to that. But with characters like Amon, again, I feel like that was a missed opportunity to do something great. Instead, it was just kind of we're making new rules about bloodbending just to make him more scary. Didn't really like that. That wasn't a good idea, in my opinion. With Unalaq, he's a power-hungry waterbender who wants to become the new Dark Avatar. Isn't that kind of like if Lex Luthor wanted to become the next Superman or Nega Superman? Not a big fan of that idea either. Zaheer, a dude who gains airbending powers and wants to use his power of airbending to give freedom to everyone, which I thought was a clever idea, again, because air is the element of freedom, and he wants to give freedom to everyone. It fits. It's a very fitting power to give a guy like that, and I'm willing to accept a guy like that getting power. That happens. Where did he get the ability to fly? Who taught him that? It's a power he has that I just don't understand where he got it. Again, a minor problem, but still a problem, and a problem that I've heard a couple other people point out. And then Kuvira, probably my second favorite villain, just because I get where she's coming from a historical perspective. I can see the connections to other dictators throughout history. I actually feel for her a little bit. I think she's got a good character, a good design, and she makes for an intimidating presence. The ironic thing about her is I don't think she's as intimidating as other characters, because if Korra had been at her best and not been going through PTSD, she probably would have beaten her much easier. But because of Korra's weaknesses, she was held back. And I think that's one of the problems that the writers had in dealing with some of these characters. When they gave Korra all 4 bending elements by season 2 and gave her the Avatar state by season 2, there was still growth for her, but not in terms of power. Just about anyone she faces now, she should be able to beat pretty easily, considering that the Avatar state let Aang beat anyone he wanted to. I don't think, other than that one instance with Azula, he has won every match he's done in the Avatar state. And she has all 4 elements now, so she should be unbeatable. I think the writers kind of went, shoot, what do we do now? We gave her no weaknesses. And so they had a bit of trouble, so they had to constantly throw monkey wrenches in Korra's way to make the villains continue to be intimidating. When in reality, I think what could have been done is, rather than just throw monkey wrenches in Korra's way, make it that the villains have unique motives, personalities, or outlooks. And for the most part, they did that. So I give credit where that's due. But I still say that there are a few issues that could have been avoided if handled with a little bit more grace. But that's just my opinion. So anyway, guys, that's about it. Tune in next time when we talk about the next part 4. where he talks about retcons and plot holes that don't actually exist. So we'll see what he has to say there. I'm excited. This will be fun. All right, guys, I will see you in my next video. As always, I'm always anxious to learn. Do not go after Matt for anything that he says. I do not condone harassment or mistreatment. Matt is entitled to his stance, just as I'm entitled to mine. I'm always wanting to learn more. I make this series not to call out Matt, just to analyze what's being said and see if I can learn more, he can learn more, if anyone can learn more. So, guys, I'll see you in the next part and in my next video. Take care.